I better turn you around here. You don't want to look at plants all night, do you, people? Happy Friday, people. I hope you've had a wonderful day. It's been miserable here in Yorkshire. It's rained all day. It's pretty grim. Yeah, we got a very special man on tonight, Markus Stitz, who is an absolute bikepacking legend. He's ridden around the world, single speed, a proper dude. So let's just get him up and let's get this on the road. Yeah, hope you've all had a mega day. I have ridden to try and get a gas bottle for my barbecue today. No gas available. Too many people. Right, here's Markus. Let's get him on. Enough about.
The usual stupid music to get us kicked off. Happy days. Here he is. Welcome along, Markus. How you doing, my man?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well, buddy, very well. You have got your vino, and I have got my local beer from Vocation Brewery. They don't sponsor this, but they could. Yeah, how you doing, buddy? Yeah, you well?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's been a full-on week actually. Kind of like I didn't get much cycling in this week, just mainly working and trying to finish a couple of projects off. But yeah, it's been good, positive. Loads of stuff to do. I like that.
Happy days, yeah. It's always good to be busy. Quick intro for you, my man. Everyone knows who you are. You've ridden around the world single speed. You're a route designer. We're going to go with that for now. We'll talk about that a bit more. You're a filmmaker. You make some amazing films. You do motivational speaking about your journeys. You're the founder of Bikepacking Scotland. Amazing. We'll talk about that a bit more. And you're a marketing consultant. Look at you. You're a busy man. So, yeah, welcome along, mate. Thank you for taking the time to chat to me on Insta Live this lovely, drizzly Yorkshire Friday evening. It feels very Scottish in Yorkshire at the moment.
It's pissing away. No, and actually not at this very moment, but yeah, it's wet. It's pretty damp out there.
Yeah. Not a pleasant day to ride your bike, but hey, anyway. So kicking off, mate. Let's go back to 2015, 2016, because that was a big year for you. You cycled around the world. But before you did that, mate, let's kind of go back and how did your passion, your love for cycling start, mate? Where does cycling start for you?
Pretty early in my childhood, although possibly not as early and as intense as you would expect. That I was quite an anxious child actually, so it took me a while to kind of make the leap to learn to cycle, and I think it wasn't really helped by the fact that I grew up in East Germany and you couldn't just buy a kid's bike. You just had to. I started learning on a 28-inch bike for my mum, so it was huge. It was this tiny Marcus trying to kind of like make the first attempt to cycle this, and I finally succeeded. And then I think like I just kind of did as you did as a child in Germany. I don't know about the UK or New Zealand or other countries, but you know, in Germany you just cycle. That's quite normal. Like I wasn't in a club. I wasn't an overly ambitious child in terms of PE. I always loved music and arts and stuff like this. But then I remember this one time when I finally got this foldable bike handed over from my brother, I think it was. And I was in the garden with my mum and the peace tour was passing. And I was like, I really want to see those guys, but I wasn't really keen to convince my mum to come too. So I strapped this little blanket on my bike and off I went by myself. I knew roughly where I needed to go. And so I cycled to the road where the peace tour was passing and back again. And I think my mum must have died like a couple of deaths in between. There was way more mobile phones than anything else. And I always kind of look back on this episode or this one particular day. This was like my early bikepacking trip. You know, this is possibly the most adventurous thing I've ever done. And then yeah, kind of like cycling was fine. You know, I cycled to school every now and then, but I really picked up cycling when I was studying at university in Ilmenau in Germany, and then yeah, kind of did the odd mountain bike ride there, and my longest ride then was 130 kilometers to go to from the place where I was studying to my parents' place and back again, in one go, while also putting the chainring halfway through my leg because I slipped off my cleats. So I got about 80 kilometers with that injury, which was a bit nuts, but then I think the really where the whole adventure cycling came in was New Zealand. Because I came to New Zealand after university and thought like I wanted to spend like a year in New Zealand, but I didn't really have a clue really what I'm gonna do. And then I saw those people cycle touring, and up until then I just didn't really see the benefit in that. And then I thought like, actually, I'm not sure. And then I met a guy at a hut called Clan. Was it Clan? Oh gosh, he will hopefully. But he said, like, I'm doing this tour to New Zealand. I don't really enjoy it by myself. You want to join? You seem to be quite, fit and whatever. And I thought, like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Let's do this. So I went back to Wellington, bought myself panniers, and yeah, kind of like started cycle touring really, and spent 2 months cycling around New Zealand, and it was just absolutely amazing. And I think from there on, you can see like a gradual progression of doing longer trips, and then finally starting bikepacking in 2014, and then eventually doing the around the world trip.
That's I like seeing, a lot of people, I think a lot of people think you just jump straight into these big projects, and I'm very similar to you, where there's kind of stepping stones, and you're kind of, it's progressive what you do. And like you said, if you can look back on your career and what you've achieved, there's lots of stepping stones to get where you've got to. How long did you actually spend in New Zealand? Did you spend the full year out there, or?
Oh, no longer actually, 2 years, almost.
Oh, they let you stay for 2 years. That was good of them.
Well, I went there on a working holiday visa, and I didn't work. I just holidayed, to be honest.
Best thing.
Back then, I think the useful bit of information to understand is while I was studying in Germany, I also did run a music festival. And I did that for 4 years, and then I handed it over. And it was kind of like I was going to New Zealand, a little bit of mixed feelings, because it's been a thing I had built up. There's 2,500 people in that year, and it was such a it's kind of something you don't really want to leave. But I also knew like this is like it's a bit like the town where I did it in. There would always be a limit to what I could do, and I knew that it will be coming a point in time where I just have to jump off that wagon and do something else. So I thought like this is quite. But then I was in New Zealand, and my friend who was supposed to run the festival on my behalf was struggling a little bit with that, and so I said to him, look, why don't we do the following? I'm gonna spend about until March traveling around. I'll come back to Germany. I'll help you running the festival. That's kind of work. And then I'll go back to New Zealand on the last 2 months of my working holiday visa and try to find a permanent job. And that's exactly what I did. So that's why I spent quite a bit of time. And then I spent about 1.5 years working there, yeah, properly.
Oh. Brilliant, mate. Yeah, fair enough. Listen, hey, legal or illegal at all, it's all good, mate. That's a pretty accommodating country. I'll give you a pass on that, seeing as I was born, so that's legit. It's fine. I'll stamp your passport. Yeah, you're fine. Cool, mate. So how did the kind of whole round the world come about, and why single speed? I know there's a couple of questions there, and there's two big answers there, but so let's kick off. So why ride around the world?
So why ride around the world is that is actually very closely connected to New Zealand. So when I was on the plane to New Zealand, finally realizing that I had exactly the wrong kit, because it's not actually a tropical warm country. It's kind of a bit like Scotland at times, or if you go further south. I watched The Flying Scotsman, which is the film about Graham O'Brien.
Graham O'Brien, yeah, great film.
He is such an inspirational character. I really like his approach. And, I watched it, and there's this one scene where they race a tram to a new world record. And I had been to Scotland beforehand, the summer before I went to New Zealand, and I liked Scotland as well. And so I was watching that film and kind of was just like, oh, this is cool, you know, like they're toasting to a new world record. And this is like, records have never really bothered me that much, to be honest with you. But the whole doing something, going around the world first, I thought that's pretty cool. What can I do? You know, is there anything I can work towards? Because I also wouldn't want to jump out of the blue into the cold water and just do it. And then, you know, I've like lived then spending quite a bit of time in New Zealand. It kind of like I really got into the cycle touring. I really got into into cycling in general, adventure cycling, and then I also discovered the connection between Dunedin and Edinburgh. So Dunedin is basically Edinburgh's mini-me in New Zealand, all the same street names. And I thought like this is like, you know, I think a lot of the work I'm doing nowadays is storytelling, and I think that's kind of the same. I thought like this is actually a cool story. You know, this is not just I didn't want to do just another around the world trip, which is nice. Like I think to a certain extent, it's you know, escaping the here and now and doing something for a year, which is totally different. And while that's a nice thing to do, I wanted to have like an angle to it. But it took me a long time actually to kind of to convince myself when the right time to leave is. So, but before I left New Zealand, then I talked to a guy called Brett Kennedy, who is the co-author of the rules, the Illuminati rules. And I don't know anyone's read that book. That man's got serious intentions, in a sense that if you put something out to him, he will always take you up on it, basically for the rest. He's got like a super brain. He'll remember everything. So I spoke to him on the night before I left New Zealand to go back to Europe and said to him, look, I had this idea in my head all the time, and next time I'm going to come back to New Zealand, I will not take the plane here. And then he was like, oh, that sounds pretty much like a round the world trip. And that was in 2009, and then came back to Scotland and was working on kind of limited contracts all the time because I knew I wanted to do this kind of big trip, and working on a 2-year contract would literally allow me to have some planning time to earn some money, but then also having a good excuse clause to get out and do something else and not having to hand in my notice or whatsoever. Like the jobs would just normally finish, and that went on for a long time until I then was offered a permanent long-term contract. And I think that was the point where like the switch was flicked around in my brain, where I was like, right, this is permanent now. So by the very moment you sign this contract, then you still haven't done the trip, and that's where I said, look, better now or never, and handed in my notice and said, well, thanks very much for offering me a permanent contract. Very kind of you, but that's not what I wanted. I think there's this moment in your life where you finally realize you need to change direction here, because otherwise you go down, you'll be taken down a route that you don't want to go down. And, you know, when you do that, you get bitter at some stage. And I'm not the sort of person who wants to get bitter about anything. So I've said to myself, look, hand in your notice. That's just, and then that very moment, then I thought like, so right, okay, you've kind of finally committed to doing around the world trip. And beforehand, I've been cycling a lot of single speed. That kind of happened by accident, because I did a trip to Germany in the middle of winter and just wanted to have a really trouble-free bike, but then kept on cycling on that bike for such a long time. And I feel that, you know, you are capable and known for cycling single speed bikes. You want to do around the world trip. You love storytelling. This just makes perfect sense. You know, why would you go, you're not utilized? Like, I think a lot in life, and you will know that you know, as an elite athlete, is about using your potential and discovering your potential first and then making the most of it. And I think that was the moment where it's like, I've done all of the single speed stuff. Some people thought it's totally nuts cycling up behind Scotland on a speed bike, or, you know, any of these trips I've done before. And I thought like, well, cool, you know, I'm just going to use a single speed bike and go around the world. And that's where the idea was born. And it literally took from March handing in my notice until September, and I was on the bike.
Wow. So was that, had you started to piece together a route before that kind of march, or was that like as soon as you handed in your notice, you were like, I need to get this sorted?
Yeah, yeah. So I did. I mean, I had a rough, of course, I had a rough idea in my head because I think if you like, with all the years carrying that idea around in my head, I was obviously looking at options, you know, and reading books. There's one which kind of stands out, is A Long Ride for Pi by Tim Mulliner, who cycled from London to Christchurch for a pi, and his route was quite interesting. He went over Central Asia. I mean, that's like, it seems like this big trip and like this big ambition, but then if you drill it down into little steps, you're just cycling each day. Like, it's not rocket, really not rocket science. And I thought, like, you know, I wanted to go back to the States because I've spent a bit of time working over there. And I love the idea of going back to some places where I had worked and lived to kind of catch up with some mates again. So I had a friend in New York I wanted to catch up with. I loved San Francisco because I did a working holiday there in 2000. So I wanted to go back to San Francisco. So pretty much the route across the States was set. I was also utterly fascinated by Iceland. So I thought, like, if I'm going to fly to the States anyway, I might as well drop down halfway through, spend a bit of time in Reykjavik, or do a little trip of Iceland and sneak that in. And then obviously New Zealand was on there. So a logical consequence was to fly from San Francisco to Auckland, cross New Zealand. New Zealand was one of those, to me, and that felt really strange when I actually was there. It's a bit like a homecoming because I think part of me is still in New Zealand. I really loved my time over there. It's a great country. I've got some amazing friends there I'm still in touch with. So, you know, it's kind of like, for me, like, I wanted to maximize my time there. Never been to Australia, so put that on the map. And then kind of, you know, to get from Australia back to Scotland, you kind of need to go over Asia in some shape or form. But that part of the route really just came together then rather than on the road. Yeah.
So you didn't like set off with the like, this is the route I'm going to ride. It kind of evolved as you were riding and thought, oh, that's fascinating. I might go and visit that, or yeah.
Yeah, it's because, again, and that's possibly my personal approach, but I also think it was a good approach to treat that. I wasn't doing it like Mark or Jenny, or I wasn't going to break a world record. I set a world record on a single speed because there is no such thing. But that trip wasn't about breaking a record. That trip was possibly about making it happen and showing to people that it's possible to cycle around the world on a single speed. But it wasn't about setting a particular time, because I knew by the very moment I would do that, someone else would jump on his bike and try to break it. And that's, you know, that's not my philosophy of going on a trip. My idea of going on a trip is to kind of really let the environment guide you to where you're going to end up. You know, I think there will always be an element of pre-planning in there, because you need to make a plane at some stage. You need to pre-arrange something. But within that, there's so much magic. Kind of, yeah, just doing, you know, treating every day like a new adventure. I mean, I had my rough intervals for about 14 days. So I would kind of roughly look ahead, for example, leaving New York, where I roughly want to be in 14 days time, and then kind of look at potential overnight stops in between. But that was very loose, and you know, if I had a good reason to cycle less or more a day, then I would do that. And I used warm showers quite a lot, especially in the States. So sometimes you need to pre-arrange that a little bit in advance. But most people are cool with if you send them a message in the morning saying, you know, I could potentially make it to you tonight. You got space for me to stay? And they were like, yes. And by the very moment you mention you're on the single speed bike, they kind of go like, oh, wow, okay, what? Yeah. Like, you know, if you make it, you know, there'll be and yeah, so that was the approach. And if there was something along the way, then I would just take the time and explore it. Or other times, the opposite, where, you know, there's also, and I think this is what doesn't come across sometimes in those adventure tales, that you will have some very, very dull and boring moments on a trip like this. You know, you cycle through areas which are just not inspiring at all. That's the reality. You know, not everything on a 360-day trip is exciting and inspiring and whatsoever. Sometimes you just want to have some, I don't know, yeah, sometimes you just have a really boring stretch of highway for 50 kilometers and just want to put your head down and get through it as quick as possible. And all of that has an impact on where you're going to end up. And then I remember I had this one amazing conversation, for example, in a McDonald's somewhere of nowhere in the States, and the guy who was in his 80s came in, like, stopped with his pickup truck, was looking at my bike, and he was like, I want to buy you a coffee. And I was just like, oh damn, I really want to leave because I've been in here already for an hour. And then I felt like, no, I will spend another hour here because, you know, I can cycle in the dark if I really need to. And this, you know, this is what I'm doing. So I was out there to meet new people, to kind of, yeah, experience new cultures, experience the landscape around me. And that was very hard to do if you have an A to B goal each day and just keep checking mail all the time.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to Mark about, you know, obviously he's ridden around the world twice, and his were two very, very different trips. You know, like he set the world record riding 100 miles a day the first time around, you know, which he looks at now as laughable after razzing around the world in 80 days. But yeah, I think when, you know, talking to him about when he wrote his first book as opposed to his second, he really wondered what his second book was going to be about, because the first book was so much about the people he met and, you know, the kind of relationships that he formed and, you know, what was happening, where the second was obviously just about A to B, A to B, A to B, A to B. Got to ride 240 miles a day. That's all I'm doing. I'm not stopping. I'm not talking to people. Like at one point, I think they even asked people to not talk to him because he just wasn't in the mood to, you know, be interviewed while he was doing 16 hours a day on his bike for, you know, what day, whatever it was. So, yeah, it's pretty crazy. But the one thing that I do love is, having spent 2 winter seasons living in America, is everyone that I speak to about America, everyone loves America and the people of America. And I think what is really sad is through the politics of America, it gets kind of painted in a certain way where it looks like it's this really negative country, and actually it's full of these really vibrant people that are so warming and welcoming and absolutely love their country and love visitors. It's fantastic to hear stories like yourself, you know, who just like had a fantastic time there.
Yeah, and this, like, it's also, I also think that kind of pretty much applies to every country you go to in the world. Like, I'm yet to find a country where I would literally say I do not want to go back. I did not like the traffic in Bulgaria, that's for sure, but still the people were welcoming, you know, it's the kind of thing. And yeah, that the States were really interesting in that sense, because it's such a, like, what you need to understand about the States, literally every state is different, and the mentality in every state is different. And, you know, people I think are like, the States stood out in a way that people were utterly welcoming to me. You know, they were really, really friendly. You know, they were like, I used warm showers a lot in the States because hotels are pretty expensive, and wild camping sometimes is a bit tricky as well. But, you know, that was totally made up for the people. Like, it's just, and from all walks of life. You know, I stayed in very small places. I remember I stayed in one place in New Mexico, which was in one of the most deprived parts of the US, and I was still received with such a warm welcome there. And on the flip side, on the opposite, I stayed in an absolute mansion in St. Louis with 5 extra bedrooms I could have used. But what I also found interesting, like from a cultural perspective, what I always find interesting, like I had obviously trimmed myself down to the very minimum I could take, and interesting to kind of then it's kind of for one night you're stepping into this totally surreal, and that was part of the trip as well. I think my kind of purpose of the whole trip was just like, I want to be as open as experiences. You know, there is always still a little bit of a rigid frame around it, because I'm cycling, and, you know, there's only so much I can do in a day. But within that frame, I try to be as accommodating as possible, and I think that was a really, really good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. So sorry, were you always planning on just the year, or did it just kind of work out as that, or you were just like, right, I'm going to be away for a year and that's it. So I've got to get around the world within a year.
Yeah, that was the goal. That was the goal, to keep it under 1 year. And I think the reason for that one was that I think I didn't want to be, and this sounds, I was really careful with this statement, but I think you'll meet some people out there who have been touring for such a long time. And for me, I didn't want this to become routine. I didn't want this to become my life as such. It's very easy to do that. It's very easy, especially if you're from a country like the UK or grew up in Germany, or if you're from the States, like I think we have money to do those things. If we work in kind of okay jobs, and then especially if you go to like Southeast Asia, where life for us is actually really affordable. So, I live on a £5 budget a day. But I didn't want to, this was a one-off. This was a one-off experience for me. And I think by the sheer fact of setting a goal or a time frame to it, it was also quite interesting because, I was really like trying to enjoy the experience as much as I could, because I knew it's not going to become routine. It's not going to be the rest of my life. And yeah, so that was the reason for the 1 year goal.
Yeah. No, it's fair enough. We met when I was in Patagonia, right in the Carretera Austral. We met an English guy who had ridden from the UK to Hong Kong, and then he just decided to carry on. Basically ditched all of his stuff. He was riding with one pannier, ripped t-shirt and stuff, but you could just see he was kind of lost in that adventurous kind of I'm just going to ride my bike into the sunset every day. And that was pretty much, you could see, he was probably late 20s, but it's almost like that. You look in his eyes and he's gone. He's just going to spend the rest of his life riding his bike around the planet, just bouncing one season to another and just living the dream. It's a
I'm fascinated by this as well, and it's very, you will possibly know that, I think, from bikepacking. Sometimes I have moments where I'm kind of like, I could do this for the rest of my life. This is pretty cool. But then I also thought about like how I'm going to make this financially viable, because I knew there will also be a physical, like if I'm 70 years old, then I might not be able to go up the hills that quick as I do right now, and I was just kind of like, I think I'm trying to strike a good balance of, and I think this is kind of coming back to adventure. I think if you manage to insert as much adventure as possible into your everyday life, not having the total need to have like those periods of escaping the world, that for me is the ultimate goal. It's just kind of trying to make what I'm doing on an everyday basis as adventurous as possible. Still living in kind of an everyday world as such, and I think this is why I think, especially in the last 3 months with lockdown, that helped me a lot, because I'm used to things changing on an everyday basis, and I've got no problem with that. I actually quite enjoy that. And so I think being ripped out of this routine by a virus and all of a sudden really having to change our ways of living, because otherwise it would potentially mean death, was much easier, other than all of a sudden realizing, oh my gosh, how I'm going to do this. And again, just kind of making being, I'm stuck in a 1-bedroom flat in Edinburgh, and this is a very noble problem to have, to be honest with you. I'm not this really comfortable, and that's the sort of thing I had to remind myself all of a sudden. This is not hardship. I can sit in a 1-bedroom flat with a nice view in Edinburgh and with a glass of wine, and it's just like, that's not really a hard life, isn't it? But it's just like, I think it was good having the skill to be able to adapt to different situations, and I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of traveling and bikepacking in particular gives you gives you the value of everyday life, and coming back to a bed and a hot shower and
Yeah.
running water and all these simple things that we all take for granted. I mean, I get asked a lot why I do these stupid things that that we do, and I always say, "Oh, it's for the shower at the end." Like standing in a hot shower at the end, but it's magic, isn't it? It makes you really appreciate the fact you can get and go into your bathroom, turn a couple of taps on it, and you've got running hot water for eternity. Is magical.
Yeah.
So you ride around the world. You come back. What's riding around the world taught you?
A lot. A lot, really. Like, I wouldn't say I come back as a totally changed person, because again, this is something I don't really believe in. You're still the person you are. You had different experiences. You can't change yourself. You are who you are. I think a few things. I think, and this is kind of the thing that's not so well known but my dad died while I was out riding around the world 3 months in, and I think that brought me mortality. Up until then, it was this strange concept that we're gonna die at some stage, and that brought it home, where you kind of realize I hadn't expected that. He had a bike crash, so, it was an accident, and that can happen. And I think so. When I came back from the trip, I was just like, those things can happen. So you've done, you've done that. This was a huge thing to do, making the cut in your life, getting on the bike, spending a year cycling around the world, and I thought, like, so what else am I gonna do? And what it had taught me that you can make things happen. Sometimes it's a bit sometimes it's a bit difficult, and there's no such thing as a clear path to achieve things, but and so I thought, like, I've done this, so as a life skill, this is huge, like from an experience point of view, and then I thought, like, so my background is marketing. I worked in marketing beforehand. I enjoyed it, but I also at times found it that I'm working to promote something else, and it's I'm good at it, but it's not really what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I thought, like, yeah, so I've been to 26 different countries. I've cycled through them. I love Scotland. I would like to stay here. I want to make this my home a bit more permanently. How can I combine all of those things? And but then I was kind of pondering around for 2 months, and then the security mode kicked in, where you kind of go like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to write an application and hand in my CV and take another job, and it's all going to be easy. And I did that. And I was utterly terrified when I came out of the first job interview, because I was kind of like, they were like, whenever I brought up the round the world trip, people kind of treated that as like a career mistake. And I was like, no, that's not what it's about. This has been such a brave, and that for me as a person was such a huge learning curve. The other people treated it as a break in my career, and I was like, no, it's not at all. And that kind of, like, I think finally brought home to me, I don't want to be, I'm not the sort of person who can go back doing a 9 to 5. I've never done a 9 to 5 beforehand. I just, like, this is not going to work. We were talking about bitterness beforehand. This is like, I think if I'm 50, I'll see myself very bitter if I'm doing this. And so I kind of put a break, and then I also kind of thought, like, you don't have to immediately start earning money again, because I could live with very little. All I had rent, that was about it, and a bit of food. And I think this is where the whole Bikepacking Scotland idea came about, where I thought, like, I love Scotland. I've got this experience, and there's not much in the way of bikepacking here for the moment. Why don't I start, developing trails? And I had done that before the round the world trip, because I did the Capital Trail in my free time. And I thought, like, if I've done the Capital Trail, I've done this round the world trip, it will take a long time in order to get where I want to be. And I think this is the other thing, what I thankfully very early realized, like, I might not be able to make my full-time living from this at the very first, 3, 6, 1 year, 2 years even. So I also applied for a marketing job, which was 2 days a week for the Borders Book Festival. So that gave me a little bit of security. And it was something I wanted to do. It also was something which is not bike related, which was actually really nice because you can get very stuck in this bike world all the time. And so I had a bit of security. I could pay my bills, and I think by the very moment I accepted that job in November, I thought like, "Wow, this is the time where I really, really have to get my stuff together and start Bikepacking Scotland." And just literally went online and registered a URL called bikepackingscotland.com, and there it was. I had a website, and just had to fill out the content.
Yeah, it's been incredible. So you've gone on lots of big journeys. But there's also this now, and you're not the first person I've spoken to about this, about actually you can find adventure on your doorstep, and that's becoming, I think, more and more important, and certainly now more than ever with this whole COVID thing is about you don't have to ride around the world to have an adventure. You can put some bikepacking bags on your bike and go out for an overnighter and have an amazing time and be back in the morning. And I mean, Alistair Humphreys is, he's the, coined the whole micro adventure, the 5 to 9, and that certainly really changed my perspective on adventure, I think. So what are your thoughts on that whole kind of smaller adventures rather than this whole around the world thing? Because not all of us can just drop everything for you and ride around the world.
And I love it, and this is kind of like, I think, and that's something I'm very keen to get across in my talks, and also in my messaging. I think adventure is not defined by any shape or form by the size of it, or whatsoever. And I also do think that, and I'm to blame for this as well. If you look at my carbon footprint, it's miserable, Flying back and forth from New Zealand to Kyrgyzstan to the States, whatever. So I think in the long term we really need to change the way we live, and I think this is the kind of thing, and the whole adventure idea. So adventure, I think for me personally, and this is something I realized much more over the last years, is it's got nothing to do where you go and how long you go. It's about how you actually, the mindset you are in, and you can happily just be 5 miles away from your own home. I've done that, not making it sound too abstract, but like in the last couple of months, I was obviously confined to a certain radius around my flat. And so I really had to rediscover Edinburgh as a city, and I thought I had seen a lot of the city, and I was actually actively, there was so much more to seek out, and adventure, I think for me, is about, like, there's an element of unknown in it, so if you've never slept in a bivy bag in your life beforehand, that is a great adventure, that's a huge thing. If you've never been on a bicycle and you make your first ride bike, and that could be in a car park of a supermarket, that's a massive adventure. It's the kind of thing, I think it's about breaking out of the, like, a set mindset and trying something new. And I think that's and obviously, if you're, for me, and having done it around the world trip, that obviously sets the mark right up there. But then it's also that's the wrong way to treat that, because for me, going 5 miles from my front door is as big of an adventure as going around the world. It's just in different circumstances, and I think that's the important thing. And then I think this is I think a couple of things that I've learned in the last 3 months, and just sometimes we're forced to learn those things. Nature is super important. I think we cannot deny that. And like just being able to go out for an hour a day during lockdown was such a massive thing, for my own mental well-being. And without that, I don't think I would have coped as well as I did. So, I think that's the sort of thing. And also, I think also not taking things as a given, you know, and that's also a huge ingredient of adventure. You know, I think adventure is also going in your local environment and discovering all the little nice flowers and animals and things that are creeping around. I think that's kind of the sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of, I love the micro adventure idea. I also, I mean, on the flip side, I also love going to Kyrgyzstan for 4 weeks, you know, and riding in a Tian Shan and a massive big mountain. And that's, you know, that's a very, very different scale of doing things. And that from time to time is potentially necessary as well. Because I think it's also about, it's all fine and well discovering your local area, but you will always be in the same cultural context. Whereas if you put yourself into Kyrgyzstan, if you go to some places in Southeast Asia, or I was in Patagonia, it's a different thing, you know. You need to readjust yourself. You need to understand the country, the people, how you approach certain things might be very different from how you approach them back home. So, and I do think that is necessary for personal development as well, but it doesn't have to be. And if you know, this year I've kind of signed up to the idea, it won't be that far away this year to go anywhere, and that's fine. That's not a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. I'm in complete agreement, really. I think since I've become a professional athlete, those big adventures kind of, you know, they just don't fit in anymore. So if it means that I can sneak you know, an evening walk up the hill behind my house and bivvy out, and then, you know, have a terrible night's sleep, get woken up at 4, you know, when the sun comes up, and then kind of stagger back down, you know, it's still an adventure. And I've spent a lot of nights in a bivvy bag and a lot of nights camping and things, but it's still, you know, it's still great to go somewhere, get your head down, and just you know, and just enjoy being outside. And yeah, it's just the unknown, isn't it? I think half the time it's just the absolute unknown of, I'm going to go and sleep on the hill, and, you know, it's said it's not going to rain, but it could absolutely lash down, which could make it miserable. But, you know, you're always going to learn something, aren't you? That's the thing. You're always going to learn something.
And I think looking back, and you will possibly be the same, like the things I still remember were the things that didn't go to plan. You know, if something went smooth and it was enjoyable, I'm not denying that's not enjoyable. It's nice planning something and it actually works. That's cool. But the things you really remember, and the things you know, coming back to storytelling, if I look at the article I've written around about the experience in Kyrgyzstan, this is about it's pretty full on to read, but, you know, it's about sitting in a toilet in the middle of nowhere with diarrhea, and, you know, in that very moment not feeling really great about it. But if you look back 2 weeks time and you arrived in Bishkek and you kind of go like, phew, I made it, you know, cool. You know, and I think that in the end is what builds you as a person. That's what's building your character on that. And I think this also, as you know, as people, you know, like, you know, as someone, I think I'd much rather be seen for those sort of things than the things that actually go to plan. And this is, yeah, just, I think there's something magic about that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're always that type 2 fun experience is always the unplanned, is always at the time it's horrific, isn't it? But you look back on it with, it's funny how your mind just blocks out how bad it was. And you're like, oh, that was fun. That was great. Well, let's do that again. So, mate, let's talk Bikepacking Scotland, and what have you been up to recently? Because I know you sent me a route plan a couple of days ago, and a little video which is dropping soon. Talk to us about what you've been up to lately, mate.
So that's the biggest project I've worked on so far, actually. I've been developing 10 different gravel routes and a longer bikepacking route, which is 331 kilometers. I do not know what that miles is. Like 11 years in the UK, I still not get my head around.
I'm the same, mate. I'm the same. I still work in Ks.
Oh yeah, New Zealand's on kilometers as well. So yeah, that's been a huge project. Started in November. And like, to be honest with you, it was great because lockdown basically gave me the opportunity to kind of like put a little bit of extra work into it. It was supposed to launch in May, which would have been great, but I think having a few months more to kind of just go through things in a little bit more detail was great. So that's going to be launching very soon. And the idea, again, is it's a bit of a move away from the other Bikepacking Scotland routes, who are quite full on at times, except the Go East Lothian Trail. I mean, the Capital Trail is quite a technical route. Although, you know, you can cycle those routes. If you take it a bit easier, then just take a little bit longer, and that's fine. But so the idea around this project was to come up with a bikepacking route which really captures the beauty of Scotland in a very defined area, and Highland Perthshire is amazing for that. And I always find when I start those projects, so you kind of commit to do the work, and I've spent quite a bit of time beforehand scoping the area. So, you know, I need to have a good feel for, you know, if I commit to a project like this, that I can actually find good trails, that I can find something that satisfies that. And I did that, but the scope of the project was quite big. So it's 781 kilometers of mapped routes, which is it's quite substantial. But it was interesting, while working on this, I actually realized there's so much more there. Like, it's such a vast area for gravel riding. Is absolutely fantastic. So, you know, literally what it ended up being is just hopefully just a starting point of making it a little bit more. And I've also tried to put a little different angle to it, of making things more accessible, because I think we sometimes talk about the bikepacking scene, and I really dislike that term, because you know, the whole scene thing kind of means that you need to be part of the club, and that's not what it's about. You know, bikepacking is it's a bit like along the lines of adventure. You know, it's an inclusive thing. It's possibly the most inclusive cycling area of cycling, or whatever you want to box you want to put it in. And that's very much reflected in those routes. So you've got the shortest route is 12 kilometers, you know, and you could make that an overnight adventure if you want to. You could kilometers, pitch your tent, and ride the next 6 kilometers, and that's really cool. Whereas the bikepacking route, the longer route, is much longer and much more intense. Opportunity to experience the area. So that's dropping very soon. On the 15th of July, it's going to be released. The whole network, all the trails, all the route descriptions, and also a new film. And the new film came about, and I think this is again where it's great to. No, it's not great to have lockdown. I don't think it's the right term to put it, but it was good having extra time work on that, because book about the drove roads of Scotland from Haldane, and that really brought home how much similarities there are between bikepacking and cattle droving, because those were people who about 300 years ago drove the cattle from the islands down to the markets in Crieff and Falkirk. And I would argue the fascination for some of the people doing this is being out in the open air, you know, being able to pitch your camp with your cattle somewhere in a super nice place, living very basic most of the time, because that's what we wanted. And I think I found when I was reading this book, I could see a lot of the stuff I'm doing bikepacking in that, you know, trying to find the right way to pass. You know, sometimes you also end up waiting to bog for 5 kilometers or even longer, and it's not pleasant, but that's part of the experience. And so yeah, it was absolutely amazing to kind of having a little bit of extra time. And this is so the film is centered around the story of the drovers, and trying to make a connection between showing these beautiful landscapes, but also having a bit of a, I always like, and I think that's been becoming a real theme with the work I've been doing as well. I'm fascinated by history. I'm fascinated by Scottish history in particular, because it's really interesting. And especially if you then look back into particular times of Scottish history, like, you know, in the 18th century, for example, you know, there was so much going on, good and bad. And then being able to dive into that, and then actually going to the countryside and seeing signs of that, and they are dotted all over Scotland. They still exist, and you don't really have to look that hard to find those places. I think, and that's very much reflected in that new.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's coming from New Zealand, and which has very, is very new history compared to Scotland, and being out in that in England is absolutely absolutely incredible. And I know you've put in an awful lot of work. You've got an extensive library in terms of Scottish history. So I've seen the film. The film's amazing. I mean, you've got this lovely way, your narration through these films. You've clearly done a lot of research into kind of the areas that you're riding and things like that. So I'm certainly looking forward to heading up your way. I mean, here's a question for you, because I've always been a massive advocate, massive fan of Scotland, and I've ridden and raced in a lot of countries all over the world, and I still think Scotland is one of the best countries. It's my favorite country by far to bikepack in, because it's just so accessible, yet it feels so wild, and it feels, you really feel out there, and you're on this massive adventure, but yet you're in such a confinement of such a small country. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of possibly the main reason why I ended up living here. It is well, it looks wild. Let's say that it's possibly not as wild as you think it is any longer, because a lot of cultivated, but then a lot of the land in Europe in general is cultivated. So I think you always had to other countries, and I grew up in East Germany, and East Germany in particular is urban, pretty much the whole place. Very few bits of land in between which are still in their wild condition. And you're talking about 2 kilometers of forest every. And Scotland I think it has this remote feel to it, and this is why I think also the access rights play a huge part in this. Having the ability to responsibly use other people's lands for doing what you're doing, not having to confined to certain routes. And I think that plays a huge part in why bikepacking is so popular up here. That comes with ability as well, and I think this is the other thing. I think is like those places are only accessible in that sort of way if people behave properly, and that's the kind of thing. But I'd argue the majority of people does. There's only very few, and it's interesting. I think that because that is quite an interesting angle, because a new film I'm working on researching at the moment is about John Muir. And Muir is such an interesting character because he has been such a hugely influential man, especially in the States, for founding the national movement. Whereas in his own country where he grew up, he's not unknown, but he's not. I don't think he's as known as he deserves.
Not as iconic, yeah.
But he is also, and I'm reading his biography at the moment. Is a very interesting character, because kind of you would kind of think like that someone like him would have always been like this, and he's actually not. He was brought up by this very, very strict, almost religiously fanatic father, and then he was escaping that. And then again, the reason why I love doing the filmmaking, I do find bits of me in those characters. I do find bits of me in the Trover, whereas I do find bits of me in John Muir as well, because he did his first 1,000-mile journey escaping this reality, and then slowly but surely became very sick of in that journey, but then kind of found at the stage in the book at the moment where he basically kind of moved into kind of a wild area and kind of finds his inner peace and his kind of tune with nature. And that's really interesting. And I think in Scotland that's still possible. You can still go out into those areas and you can really just drop everything and just kind of really just experience the place. And I think that's what the country is about. And it's got on the other hand, it's also, and I think this is worthwhile, like, it's got really welcoming people. People are really interested. Found them also curious about strangers. That's one thing that attracted me when I moved to Scotland. Is like, it's a very open-minded country. It's also very steeped in tradition, but at the same time, people are curious about strangers. People are curious about things because they've always been a nation that had to travel across the world. In the 1800s, people were literally forced off their land, or not their land, but they were kind of whatever. They had to leave the land because there was no life, there was no jobs for them, and then they emigrated to other people. And I think that attitude has stayed with people, and I think this is something. I think that's the reason why Scots are very welcoming to other people, and that's obviously a really good thing if you travel in a country.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely, for sure. Well, listen, mate, we've just about burned through an hour, and it feels like that, which is absolutely amazing. It's been super fascinating to get an insight into what you're up to, what you've been up to, and obviously everything you've achieved. So, quick shout out for your handles. How if people want to find out more about you, more about these new bikepacking routes in Perthshire, where do we go to find that, mate?
So a couple of things, long connection. So all my personal stuff is at Reizkultur. That's kind of my handle on Instagram and Twitter. And just look for, like, if you want to find a little bit more about around the world trip, I think it's possibly quite easy to put in Markus and single speed, and then you come to the right sources. Bikepacking Scotland is at Bikepacking Scot on Instagram, and I think it's the same on Twitter. Don't tell anyone I'm working in marketing. I really should know those things. Perthshire Gravel, we've just started that, so there's an Instagram account called Perthshire Gravel, and then there's also Perthshire Gravel, but without the E at the end, because Twitter has a character limit. On Twitter as well. Those are the two things. And there's a website called perthshiregravel.com. Not much on there, just FAQs at the moment, but that will go live on the 15th of July, and there's a newsletter you can subscribe to. And the same with Bikepacking Scotland. There's bikepacking.com, there's routes there, there's a newsletter as well, which I do occasionally send out. But yeah, there's kind of loads of to kind of find out a little bit more.
Absolutely, there's super amount of resource on that route, and that's how I think we originally met. Where I saw your video of Wild About Argyll, and I thought, I need to go and ride that trail, and it was like, wow, that's absolutely incredible, and that's how we kind of met. So super cool, Markus.
Kind of someone mentioned it. Charlie will be amazed with that, because we also know each other to Charlie Hobbs, or Charlie the Bike Monger.
Oh, of course, yes, Charlie the ex-bike monger.
Dashes, which would possibly fill another Instagram conversation, but like literally we're running a couple of events called the Dirt Dashes. So there's for Dirt Dash on Instagram and Facebook, and they, fingers crossed, we are still kind of hopeful that they're gonna happen this year, but if not, then they will definitely happen next year. And that's kind of like, if you bundle all of this philosophy into an event, that's kind of what it is. It's a little bit of fun, some cool.
That's super cool
with banter, so that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I've ridden 2 of them now, and they're definitely worth signing up for. They're amazing events, mate. We've got 1 minute and 30 left, so I can only thank you for your time. Even though you divaed out on me and pushed me back a day, I'll forgive you for that. Yeah. Super cool, buddy. Thanks very much. Everyone that, by the look of it, will be super keen to see these trails drop on the 15th, and I will be in touch with you, sir, about coming up and riding with you in the next 2-3 weeks. So let's make that happen. But have a great weekend, mate. Enjoy the rest of your Friday night. You've been an absolute star. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers. Thank you.
There we go, Markus. What an absolute legend. I just want to finish this with the last 44 seconds. A shout out to the Energy crew who have sent me this lovely t-shirt. thank you guys. That's Joe, who we spoke to a few weeks back about Black Lives Matter. So his Wimbledon to Saint-Tropez cycle tour. Boom, check it out. Thanks very much for watching. Enjoy Friday night, people. Ciao.